Welcome to Commander Pop Culture, a place to gather magical information with some laughs, might I add. Hello everyone, so you want to play Kylox, the Visionary Inventor? Well, I might have a list for you. I call this deck extra RNG. Originally when I came up with this, I was like, I'm just going to play as many instant sorceries as I put bodies into play, because every time he attacks, you sack any number of other creatures, and then you exile the top X cards of your library equal to the power of those creatures, and you get to cast instants and sorceries for free.
Lambs to the cosmic slaughter!
In terms of card quality, when I was originally doing that idea, it was kind of waning. It wasn't all that impactful. And then I stumbled across something better. So let's get started. We got Brawl Chief of Compliance. Reduces your instant sorceries by 1. The drawing for countering stuff, that's not a factor. This is not a counter spell deck. It's because if I exile a bunch of instants and sorceries that are counter spells from the top of my library with that attack trigger, it does nothing for you. So you just have to live with the fact that you're in blue and you're not playing counter spells. Dika the Fractal Theorist. So this is part of the equation that I stumbled upon, and that's really strong. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you make a 0/0 green-blue fractal creature and you put X counters on it, where X is that mana value. It's Dika, got Metallurgic Summoning, and Shark Typhoon. I am trying to cheat in some really big, heavy spells, and so I can feed into the loop of sacking things. And the best big mana spells for you to cheat and make big bodies off of are extra turns and extra combats. The idea is you go to combat with Kylox and you never give your opponents another chance to play the game. As dirty as that sounds, there is an RNG factor because you depend on these 3 body generators pretty heavily. The likelihood of you pulling it off is extremely hard. So if you do pull it off, you deserve it because you invested a ton of mana to get it. You took tempo hits to accomplish this. So I think you deserve it if you could go infinite combats, infinite turns. We're going to get to the infinite turns, extra combats here in a little bit, or keep on talking about the creatures. Enigma Drake, because it has star for a power, this is just like a one-off trigger that lets me sack this to feed into the Kylox. And then if the Kylox thing isn't working out, then you still have a evasive big body in play to beat people to death with. Goblin Electromancer, another instant sorcery reduction spell.
Oh snap! Hottie alert! Look at this guy! Woo woo woo!
Haughty Jin has star for power and cost reduction. Malignus, this is another one-off creature. It gets power and toughness based on half of the largest life total at the table. Mizzix is Magus, another cost reduction, but it scales with the experience counters. Popper Stitcher, I only included body efficient. I guess you could say like I have Young Pyromancer and the Izzet Soldier that does this for 2 mana, and I have Poppet Stitcher and I have Tolerant the Sky Summoner. They're just making efficient tokens for their mana investment. Soulseeker Chimera, another star power with evasion. Tarian Mauler, this is another one-off. Scales up based on the counters on it, and that happens whenever an opponent casts a spell. Thieving Skydiver, if you've heard me play blue in the past, it's only in here because I have to deal with meta issues in Magic the Gathering Online. Mana Crypt is quote-unquote casual because it's a $4 card. I mean, it's not $4 in paper, which I build these decks on a budget in paper, so people can afford to build these and try out for themselves. A lot of my cards are $5 or less. I make a few exceptions like Shark Typhoon because it's just barely over my $5 threshold. But yeah, this is in here to steal mana crypts from people. This is a Young Pyromancer clone or Chief Giant. Something that works great in this deck is Myriad. Because you can layer the triggers appropriately, you could put the Kylox attack trigger on first, put the Myriad attack trigger on after. The Myriad will resolve first, and then you get to sacrifice all the tokens you make from Myriad. And since these are 5/3s, you get to effectively sack 15 total power, go 15 cards deep into your library. Wizards of Thay, also cost reduction, and it has Myriad. Pretty nice. Okay, we talked about the creature package. Let's talk about the sorcery package. First extra turn spell, Elrond's Epiphany. You know, you can make the argument that you don't really need cost reduction for instants and sorceries, but I disagree because you can naturally draw into these big spells and they'll just be stuck in your hand because you can't cast them. So you definitely want the cost reduction from my creature package that you saw. And I also have cost reduction in artifacts and enchantments as well, but that's why I have cost reduction in this library. Beacon of Tomorrows gets shuffled into your library. You could attack with Kylox and hit this again. Call forth a Tempest. Because you're doing extra combat stuff, the likelihood of you casting a lot of spells in a single turn is really good. This has Cascade, and what is this? A one-sided board wipe for your opponent's creatures, and it does a ton of damage to your opponents. If you hit this in a Kylox trigger, save this spell for last, and you might be able to kill a bunch of people with this spell. Immolating Gyre, another one-sided board wipe. Extra turn spell. Unfortunately, it exiles itself. You want the stuff that doesn't, but an extra turn is an extra turn, and we love extra turns. And it feeds into the pieces that care about the size of your spells, so you can make another big body. Mana Geyser, because we need extra mana. Mind's Desire. Storm is effective in this deck. Mizzium Orders, it has a lot of flexibility in that you could use it as a cheap single target removal or a one-sided board wipe. Mystic's Mastery, because we don't like playing spells just one time. It has an overload cost of 8. If you hit this from the Kylox trigger, unfortunately you only get to cast one spell, but that's still significant considering you could have some really scary instants and sorceries in your graveyard. Part of the Water Veil. Another extra turn spell. Rush of Knowledge, your commander is 7 mana. This is a nice fat card advantage spell in case you become empty-handed. Surge of Victory, this is a game ender. You get to exile an instant or sorcery, i.e. your extra combat spell. Creatures you control plus X plus O, so live turn, where X is that CMC, infinite combat.
Again and again and again.
We're gonna get to those extra combat spells here in a little bit. Temporal Mastery, extra turn. Time stretch, 2 extra turns, and the spell goes to your graveyard. Walk of Eons, another extra turn spell that goes to your graveyard, and you could buy back by sacrificing 3 islands. I don't think you'll ever do that, but you never know. World at War. So there is actually only 2 extra combat spells that really work with Kylox, and I have experience playing stuff like this because I used to play Velamocus, which is the red-white dragon from Strixhaven. I used to play like Armageddon effects, blow up everyone's lands so no one could do anything, and then you were the only one casting spells with the Velamocus trigger. Because you're casting stuff in combat, you effectively only have access to World at War and Savage Beating, and that's because of the wording of both of those spells. They'll give you extra combats, and they don't care what phase of the turn you're playing them in. Your other extra combat spells, they do. You have to be in main phase to cast them and get the bonus attack. And if you cast them during combat, you get nothing. So that's why I'm only running 2 of them. If you want to include the other extra combat stuff, it ain't bad. Like, you just have to naturally put them in your hand and then cast them and layer them in your turn appropriately. I just didn't want to have misses with the Kylox trigger. Since you're doing all this work to get a bunch of power into play so you can keep doing it over and over again, you want to minimize the amount of risk of missing with Kylox as much as you can. Nothing would feel worse than investing a really big body and hitting nothing with it. There already is a possibility of that happening. So just heed my warning about including those extra combat stuff, because we can't afford to have duds in our decks. Brainstorm. I wish there were more cards like Brainstorm out there. There's only a 3-drop that does this effect, and that's so you draw 3 cards and you get to exchange the cards from your hand and put them back on top of your library. So if you had accidentally drawn into your extra turns, extra combat steps, you could manipulate the top of your library and put those there. If I wasn't operating on a budget, I would put Jace the Mind Sculptor in this deck. I would also put in Scroll Rack, but I can't, unfortunately, so I only get a one-off effect like Brainstorm because it's cheap. Display of Power. You get to copy any number of target, instant, or sorcery spells and may choose new targets for the copies. The dream is, if you could layer them properly, I think what happens is you attack with Kylox and you just cast everything that you can, regardless if it's an instant sorcery, and everything gets put on the stack at the same time. Because it doesn't say until end of turn, it happens exactly at attack trigger. Save Display of Power for last, so you could copy everything on the stack. And then there's the Savage Beating. I'm not going to talk about the removal pieces and the other card advantage pieces, because they're just stuff I reuse over and over again. Not really worth mentioning. They're just staples that you should be playing already in your decks. That's why I'm not going to mention too much about them. Artifacts. I'm going to skip over the Mana Rocks. Mind Splice Apparatus. It has Flash, so you should only play this on other people's turns. But for every turn you put an oil counter on this, and per oil counter you reduce your instants and sorceries by 1.
The fine wine only get better with age.
So for every revolution, your stuff gets cheaper. I love scaling cost reduction. This and Mizzix Ismagus are really good. This is a new case card from Murders at Karlov Manor. It has the solve. You have to cast 4 more instants of sorceries in a single turn. Hopefully when you go to combat, you hit that many and you just get there very naturally. But once it's solved, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you get the draw card. Okay. And I'm not going to talk about the lands of the deck. They're just here for fixing. There's not a lot of utility in your lands in this, and that's a list. I hope you enjoyed. If you stayed this long, subscribe. I do a lot of deck techs. This is like one of the 8 I'm doing just from Murders of Karlov Manor. I typically do 8 per new set that comes out. And maybe I do more if there's an honorable mention. Like an honorable mention I'm considering is the mono white Panharmonicon guy from Murders of Karlov Manor. If I have extra time between now and the spoilers of Fallout, which start February 20th, which is 18 days from now, I might do it, but we'll see. If you want to influence the polls and like the order that I play these decks, you can go over to my community tab on my YouTube channel and you can take a vote, and that will determine the order that I play these decks. I am going to play them all eventually. Maybe you have interest in other Murders at Karlov Manor commanders, and hopefully I hit them with the 8 that I think interested me the most. Okay, I want to take care now. Have a great time. Bye.